opiates in general, and hopefully get some kind of basic understanding on, what these are and what they've been doing and how they've been affecting, our lives for, I don't know how long. Probably a grand deal of time. And we probably won't even get into such incredible intricacies. I thought that we would make this a little bit more loose, and we just kind of look at things and we just decide, what it was that we needed to focus on here. So when I first think of opiates, I think of generally the opiate crisis, right? And that is to say that we have a large amount of pharmaceutical use of opiate-like drugs. Opiate-likes, I guess, is what I'm saying. I think that's incorrect because, opiate or opioid, as they're putting forward in, the thing right above my head there, is probably the best terminology for the substances that we're talking about. And, what opiates do and what any endorphin replacing drug does is it basically makes it so that your normal systems for creating the things that would make it so that you can deal with pain and with normal function that is actually a very painful function if you don't have those endorphins to relax and release into your muscles. It basically destroys all ability to create those in congress with your need. That is to say that if you don't, your needs are always going to be so much higher than you're recognizing. I'm trying to, express basically. And if you start to, I guess a good way to say it is, like let's say that you have, this is being very simple and being mathematical, so let's not do it that way. It's always just an issue of a gradient. When you overdo one gradient, it really affects the way that things are going to tend to work out. So, why don't we just talk for a bit about, what they would classify an opiate as. So, I'm going to go ahead and just go into Wikipedia under opiate here. We're going to see that opiate's a term classically used in pharmacology to mean a substance derived from opium. Okay, well, opium, a plant that, can be seen here, is a poppy. Excuse me. And it's a certain type of poppy that they use for opium. I think it's, there it is. Papaver somniferum. The psychoactive compounds found in the opium plant include morphine, codeine, and thebaine. I've never heard of that. That's interesting, though. So, opiates have long been used for a variety of medical conditions, with evidence of opiate trade and use for pain relief as early as the 8th century AD. Well, there's an answer for how long these things have been really plaguing us. And for what it's worth, you can use things like heavy painkillers. Medical painkillers can be administered in certain circumstances. But in most circumstances, these things are going to end up doing much more harm than good. It's hard to find out when those circumstances exist, and perhaps there are better things to use outside of these painkillers in general. So, in 2014, between 13 and 20 million people used opiates recreationally. According to the CDC, from this population, there's been a recorded 47,000 deaths, with a total of 500,000 deaths from 2000 to 2014. So, from a population of up to 20 million, there was 47,000 deaths. It's interesting. All right. They also reported in 2015, 450,000 people died as a result of drug use. Right. Choices from opioid. Okay, so this is drug use in general versus opiates. Okay, so yeah, it's starting to get a little bit difficult to decipher already, right? Already we're like, wait, what are we talking about here? Which, you know? Okay, so as for, okay, opium or modern terms used to designate all substances, both natural and synthetic, that bind to opioid receptors in the brain, including antagonists. Opiates are alkaloid compounds naturally found in the opium plant. Okay. So basically, when the full synthesis of opioids from naphthoquinone gate synthesis or other simple organic starting materials is possible, they are tedious and uneconomical processes. Therefore, most of the opiate type analgesics in use today are either extracted from popular somniferum or synthesized from those opiates, especially thebaine. I wonder what that reference is. Okay. In 2015, researchers reported successful biosynthesis of thebaine and hydrocodone using genetically modified yeast. That's interesting. Once scaled for commercial use, the process would cut production time for a year to several days and could reduce costs by 90%. But that's only if they're making huge numbers. See, so you can already see some of the problems with the way that things are done in some of these fields. I mean, we were talking about adrenochrome the other day and how, to make commercially viable adrenaline, you have to have ketones be reduced in large quantities, right? So, I mean, it's pretty obvious that no matter what you're talking about when you're talking about pharmaceuticals, that there's something horrible going on, right? I mean, even they're saying here that, just to make it hydrocodone from modified yeast, that, it costs an infinite amount unless they can make a billion, tablets. If they make a billion tablets, then all of a sudden the costs are reduced by 90%, but somehow you've got to sell those billion tablets. It's just... All right, so anyway, let's just keep going on and looking at, so we got, a basic idea of, what opiates are supposed to be. So let's kind of get a more general idea of what they were actually in real time. Because the word opiates just means something taken from, let's get it right, the Papazere, where are we? Papaver somniferum. Because apparently other poppy plants are not going to have the same alkaloid compounds, I'm guessing. So, anyway, laudanum. So this is, something that you'll see in some random games or some other nonsense, right? But laudanum was something that was used very, very commonly in, I would probably say, in between 1800 to maybe 1930s. Probably was a good guess, and this is just a guess. We can go find the actual information. We'll go look at Wikipedia. I bet I'm going to be fairly right. But the point is that laudanum was something given for general discomfort. When seen in media, you'll see it in things like what is that? Fairly good show on HBO that is The Western. My goodness, I can't remember a thing for the life of me, but it's there somewhere. So anyway, the point is that in that show that there was a woman that was and there was a whole series of heroin addicts within the show, but in this instance, and there wasn't a whole series, there was only a few. It wasn't a point of interest, and it's Deadwood. My dumb brain. But anyway, so the woman was taking laudanum, just because because she's just a woman and doesn't have anything to do, and when the guy references it, having taken it, he's like, I don't really understand why you're doing it. The floaty feeling doesn't really do anything for me. It's like, well, it must affect the sexes differently, and of course it doesn't. But anyway, so let's go look up basically what laudanum is. So, and what's interesting about laudanum is if you look, it's not even class 4 narcotic. Now, I don't know how much harder that is to get your hands on, but especially because it's equivalent to a 1% morphine. What is a common morphine dosage? I mean, let's go look that up real quick. So we've got morphine here. Uses, dosages, side effects. Let's just look that up, see if we can find it real quickly. What a common percentage is for morphine. What if I overdose? You're not giving me any information here. Dosage information. There we are. General dosage of information for sure. Applies 15 milligrams per milliliter. I don't know how much laudanum the average person would take. Okay. IR tab initial dose 15 to 30 milligrams orally. 15 to 30 milligrams orally. All right, so you're taking a powdered opium tincture. So it's 10% by weight. You are going to probably take like still only a few milliliters. So surely these opiate doses of morphine are much, much higher, right? Right? All right, so here we are, 15 to 30 milligrams orally, and we're assuming that's at an 100% dosage rate, right? So when you're taking a milliliter of laudanum, it's the same, form as a milligram. You would have to take 10 milliliters to get 1 milligram. Are we reading that right? Okay, so if it's by weight, you're taking, let's say you somehow can, justify it by milligrams. I don't know, we could probably go see how this is dosed out. Danger of confusion. No, it doesn't seem to have an obvious how it's dosed. I guess the point is that laudanum was like nothing compared to morphine. And I think that's a good point to be made. Because what we're hearing here is like, let's say we even took a spoonful. We're taking 10 milligrams or something, right? We're still only going to be getting 1 milligram of potential, because it's only 10% of the weight and it's 1% morphine. So, I mean, you would have to take a nice cup for this to be the equivalent of morphine strength. So, I mean, that's interesting. That's interesting, right? What they've done now is that, and morphine isn't even the worst of it, fentanyl's probably worse. But what they've done now is they've taken this fairly inert thing and they've made it so hyper focused that what I would describe morphine as, or what I would classify morphine as, is basically the drug that you get before you die almost every time. Almost every time. Some people maybe live their lives while taking morphine for a long period of time. But I would say almost unequivocally that the drug that you get before you're going to die is generally morphine. Now maybe it's a drug you get right before you start to come back, too. You could say that, if it's used in ICUs commonly. I can't recall what the button was that they give you. I think it might have been morphine. But, whatever it is, it's far too strong. Everything, it's not, well, in some instances, maybe it's right, but those instances are very few and far between, and usually when you're going to be taking morphine, that's the end of you. That's usually the end of you. So, let's go on here and say, all right, so laudanum is known as a whole opium preparation since it historically contained all of the opium alkaloids, this is a kind of an interesting thing about laudanum. Today, however, the drug is often processed to remove all of the most of the noscapine, also called narcotine, present, as this is a strong emetic and does not add appreciably to the analgesic or anti-propulsive properties of opium. The resulting solution is called denarcotized tincture of opium or deodorized tincture. See, that's a very strange thing, because the word narcotic, noscapine, that's interesting. Are they removing the narcotic portion of opium? Or what does that mean? Or of laudanum? Strange. All right. Laudanum remains available by prescription in the United States and theoretically in the United Kingdom, although today the drug's therapeutic indications are generally confined to controlling diarrhea. Really? Huh. Alleviating pain and easing withdrawal symptoms in infants born to mothers addicted to heroin or other opioids. Okay. Now that makes sense. I was about to say, why is it helping diarrhea issues and alleviating pain? And then I didn't even register the easing withdrawal symptoms. But okay, that makes sense. All right, so recent enforcement against manufacturers of paregoric and opium tinctures suggests that opium tinctures availability in the U.S. may be in jeopardy. Citation needed. Well, so that's basically laudanum, but let's see here. So, used in home remedies and prescriptions, as well as single medication, for example. Wonder when it was in fashion. I said it was about the 1800s to about 1930. To understand the popularity of the medicine that eased, even if on temporary coughing, diarrhea, and pain. So this is very strange. Because, here this one researcher's noting about how it's easing coughing, diarrhea, and pain, but we've just read about how that's most common in someone with, or a withdrawal infant. So, I mean, isn't that just strange that, were these other people that were having these children possibly, heroin addicts? And, no one's, admitting to that portion of the tour, and they're like, hey, I don't know why my kid's all weird. That's an interesting idea. That's an interesting one. All right, so this is laudanum, which is not really been nor was it at the time a potential problem. It never really culminated into the kind of issue that these other drugs have culminated into. And what I'll say in reference to that is that, things like heroin, things like fentanyl, we've seen, some pretty massive spikes in deaths. So there can definitely be something said in reference to that versus something like laudanum, where there was never the huge onslaught of death and destruction from laudanum use in what it seems like they just said were the 1660s to, I suppose, now, and it's still being used in some kind of forms. All right. So hazards. Let's just look at this because this just caught my eye. Potency of laudanum. Opium tincture is one of the most potent oral formulations of morphine available by prescription. Really? Accidental or deliberate overdose is common with opium tincture given the highly concentrated nature of the solution. Overdose and death may occur with a single oral dose of between 100 and 150 milligrams of morphine in a healthy adult who has no tolerance to opiates. 100 and 150 milligrams of morphine. That seems like way more than laudanum could potentially have in it. Right? I mean, like, let's say you had a liter of laudanum. It's only 1% morphine. That means you'd only have up to 100 milligrams of morphine. Right? Have I done that terribly wrong? Or is it 1,000 milligrams of morphine? Alright, so you have a liter of laudanum. That's 1,000, grams, as it were. And it's 1%. I must be doing something wrong because I'm saying it's only 10 milligrams of morphine. All right, so this represents the equivalent of 2 to 3 teaspoons of opium tincture. Really? This opium tincture we're talking about is laudanum. Suicide by laudanum was not uncommon in the mid-19th century. But it was suicide generally, huh? It wasn't accidental. Prudent medical judgment necessitates towards dispensing very small quantities of opium tincture in a small dropper bottle or in pre-filled syringes to reduce the risk of intentional or accidental overdose. It's very interesting. 10 milligrams per milliliter of anhydrous morphine. Okay, so a liter would then have what, 10,000? Yeah, see, I'm being so stupid. I'm not thinking it through, huh? It's based on a milligram per milliliter thing. Wow, how stupid am I being? All right, that's fine. All right, in the United States, opium tincture contains 10 milligrams per milliliter of anhydrous morphine. So I'm just reading here about the paregoric, whether it's important. Is opium tincture or paregoric? That they're seeming to say that there's a separate type of tincture that was used. Huh. It's very strange. So I don't know what type of opium tincture we had previously in what I would call, the Old West, maybe. In that time era, at least throughout the world, so that laudanum. But they're saying that it wasn't uncommon in the mid-19th century. I mean, that's 1850s. So laudanum must have been very powerful even then. But just, it was only maybe given to people who had money. So it wasn't very common for them to die from it. All right, let's just look real quick, just because I don't know why, but I didn't have the idea that laudanum would be that effective in the killing of a person. But what do I know, right? All right, so life-threatening overdose of opium tincture owes to the preparation's morphine content. Yeah, see, morphine is just a great killer. All right, anyway. Morphine produces a dose-dependent depressive effect on the respiratory system, which can lead to profound respiratory depression, hypoxia, which means no air, right? Coma, and finally respiratory arrest and death. All right, well, if overdose of opium tincture is suspected, rapid professional intervention is required. Excuse me. The primary concern is reestablishing a viable airway and institution of assisted or controlled ventilation if the patient is unable to breathe on his own. Okay, so that's probably, when we're seeing people being stuck with, tubes because of, I can imagine something like that happening, or you're having to force down an intubation tube down their throat so that you can make them breathe. Okay, is reestablishing a viable airway and institution of assisted or controlled ventilation if the patient is unable to breathe on his own. Yeah. So basically, if you overdose on laudanum or on probably heroin or on many of these things, what happens is probably a massive shutdown of all of your systems, and they have to just literally wait for your liver and other things to process all of this toxin, and in the meantime they have to make you breathe. That's funny. That makes sense though. Alright, other supportive measures such as the use of vasopressors, and oxygen may be indicated to treat cardiac and or pulmonary failure. So yeah, basically you're just a corpse and they need to make your heart pump too. Great. Yeah, this is when you're supposed to die. No one's supposed to be trying to help you this much. Anyway, cardiac arrhythmias or arrest will require advanced life-saving measures. Oh, so no, I guess your heart is still beating. God. All right, so intravenous naloxone or nalmefene, quick-acting opioid antagonists, are the first-line treatment to reverse respiratory depression caused by an overdose of opium tincture. Gastric lavage may be of some use in certain cases. Not sure what gastric lavage is. So, all right, well, at least that broke away my silly belief that, what laudanum is not essentially that strong. It obviously is pretty strong. Interesting. Let's go down to these in fiction real quick and just see kind of when laudanum was referenced. Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein takes laudanum as his only means of sleeping, and thus preserving his life while in recovery from months of fever and a series of horrible events. That doesn't sound good. Huh. Interesting. Uncle Tom's Cabin, anti-slavery novel by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Slave named Cassie talks about how she killed her newborn by laudanum overdose to spare him from experiencing the horrors of slavery. It's been a long time since I've read Uncle Tom's Cabin. Can't say I remember that moment in the book. Well, it's talking about something else. Let's leave that alone. All right. Wilkie Collins' novel The Moonstone features laudanum as an essential ingredient of the plot. Collins based his description of the drug's effects on his own experience with it. So this guy, Wilkie Collins, obviously liked laudanum because he's mentioned more than once here. Interesting that Mary Shelley obviously probably used laudanum as well. This is an interesting little, like, who's who of people that had laudanum in their nightstand. So, laudanum appears in Charles Baudelaire's prose poem, The Double Room. William Faulkner's Requiem for a Nun. Compson, Dr. Peabody, and Ratcliffe give whiskey tainted with laudanum to a group of rowdy lynchers and a militia band that had joined together. Upon their falling asleep, they were gathered up and locked in jail while still unconscious. I mean, that's wrong in every way, but it depends on how much these rowdy lynchers were about to go lynching. But yeah, to drug a bunch of people and lock them up doesn't. All right. Anyway, and who's that? That was Faulkner. Yeah. All right. Sure. You know what's interesting about a lot of these things is that I feel as if, you know, all of these people would have had their own different drug had they been in a different time. They would not have just been like, oh, well, there's no laudanum around, so, you know. No, they would have been on Xanax. They would have been on something weird. Alright, well. And yeah, I referenced this earlier that, you know, laudanum is, you know, used in Amnesia the Dark Descent. And it's just funny, you know, like non-reference almost. But hey, you know, that's all right. Let's go on from laudanum for what it's worth to we've got either opium or heroin. I think that opium might be a little bit more, and this is a fun thing when you'll see it here. What exactly are they doing when I first look up opium? That, you know, you really named 3 different perfumes opium. V. Saint Laurent did. Well, okay, so maybe they didn't. It's just one at different sizes. But yeah, okay. At least I was being a little bit obtuse there and thinking that they were so dumb that they had named several different things opium. But, you know, didn't even really look at it. So, opium, we're going to go ahead and just click on down at our Wikipedia here just to give us, I mean, it's a very pretty looking seed. I've grown opium plants, but not, I don't think it was Papaver somniferum. Very, very difficult to say. I don't think that they would give you those, but even then, you know, I have no idea how you're supposed to do any of the work to make this into something that would actually be opium. Nor am I really a person who, I don't even agree with the use of opiates for the most part. I feel like they're one of the replacing drugs, you know, one of those things that replaces something that your body's naturally functionally doing, and you're only making yourself weaker. And only when you are in that huge state of overpain where your body can't even begin to adjust and keep up are you supposed to be taking these extra drugs. Maybe. So, anyway. Opium, or poppy tears, scientific name Lacrima papaveris, is dried latex obtained from the seed capsule of the opium poppy. And again, Papaver somniferum. Approximately 12% of opium is made up of the analgesic alkaloid morphine. Approximately 12% of opium. which is processed chemically to produce heroin and other synthetic opioids for medicinal use and for the illegal drug trade. 12% of opium? Do they mean approximately 12% of the, seed capsule? I don't know. It's hard to understand. All right. The latex also contains the closely related opiates codeine and thebaine. Is it thebaine? Thebaine still. And non-analgesic alkaloids such as papaverine and noscapine, which we learned earlier was also called narcotine, though they don't have that here for some reason. The traditional labor-intensive method of obtaining the latex is to scratch the immature seed pods by hand. The latex leaks out and dries to a sticky yellowish residue that is later scraped off and dehydrated. So it's 12% of the latex. Is that right? And is that not the weirdest thing that you've ever heard in your life? That you need to scratch the fruit pods and then take the yellowish residue that's taken off and dehydrated? I mean, it's not that difficult, I suppose. It's, for what it's worth, as an individual, you could potentially do that. That's kind of interesting and cool that it at least, but to the end of getting opiates, just not as valuable anymore. So, I mean, when we think about this in a kind of a context of how this first happened, in reality, some guy came upon this poppy seed, right? Or this poppy, the seed pod after it had been scratched, and it had that latex on it, and it had already was a sticky yellowish residue, and he probably scraped it off and put it in a pipe and smoked it, right? And that's how this started. I'd have to imagine, right? That's all I can think. All right, anyway. Historically referred to related weaker preparations made from other parts of the opium poppy or different species of poppies. All right. The production methods have not changed since ancient times, though selective breeding of the Papaver somniferum plant. The content of the phenanthrene alkaloids, morphine, codeine, and to a lesser extent thebaine, has been greatly increased. Really? Well, that's, genetic engineering for you. In modern times, much of the thebaine, which often serves as the raw material for the synthesis of oxycodone, hydrocodone, hydromorphone, and other semi-synthetic opiates, originates from extracting Papaver orientale or Papaver bracteatum. Really? Okay. Serves as the raw material for... Interesting again. All right, for the illegal drug trade, the morphine is extracted from the opium latex, reducing the bulk weight by 88%. So that's where they're getting that 12%, is made up. So if you got a gram of this latex and you were to properly dry it, you're going to have, 0.12 grams left of morphine, I guess is what they're referencing. It is then converted to heroin, which is almost twice as potent and increases the value by a similar factor. The reduced weight and bulk makes it easier to smuggle. I wonder whether or not, the sale of opium latex that isn't been dehydrated is... It must be illegal, right? Because it's just morphine. But it's an interesting idea. All right, so That's why it's called poppy tears, though, huh? Because basically you're scratching an opium poppy. You're letting its latex, you know, latexy, tear turn kind of yellowish. You're scraping that up. You're reducing the bulk weight by 88% through some kind of extraction method. And you're finding yourself with a much smaller amount, but of what is a pure drug, and somehow that is then made into a type of heroin. I'm not sure how. Maybe we'll look that up when we're looking at heroin, kind of understand what's going on there, hopefully. And if not, well, like I said, we're only trying to scratch the surface here. So, alright, so human use, oldest known seeds date back to 5000 BCE. Purposes such as food, anesthetics, and ritual. They couldn't possibly know any of that, really. Opium was consumed in several ways. Inhalation of vapors, suppositories. They couldn't really know that, could they? They weren't talking to people. Medical poultices, and as a combination with a hemlock for suicide. Interesting. A great deal of empires all made widespread use of opium, which made the most potent form of pain relief then available. Allowing ancient surgeons to perform prolonged surgical procedures, opium is mentioned in the most important medical texts of the ancient world, including the Ebers Papyrus and the writings of Dioscorides, Galen, and Avicenna. Widespread medical use of unprocessed opium continued through the American Civil War, before giving way to morphine and its successors, which could be injected at a precisely controlled dosage. Huh. Yeah, I wonder what the potential uses of something like... See, the thing is, I don't know if it's a good use outside of anything. See, like I'm a pretty open guy when it comes to psychedelics. You can do a psychedelic, that's fine. But the idea of doing opiates for fun, I'm reading this, I'm saying, okay, it seems like the only way that they're saying that these are ever done in any kind of way that is functional for a societal form is because they are great painkillers during surgical procedures. And I'm going to agree with that maybe after the case now, because we've got, anesthetics that are probably much better. Interesting, though. It's an interesting to read, because when you think of opium, you think almost exclusively of an opium den, of a bunch of Chinese people, is what the common, ideal is, in some kind of weird opium den, all, or maybe, some, one or two Americans, but strung out in there. But yeah, just I don't know. You don't really imagine opium as being used for surgical procedures, but I suppose before the time when there was great ability to tincture and make better drugs, that when they would scratch it, so here's the deal. All right, they got this guy, he's freaking out, he's got his leg is needing to be cut off, and they're going to need to do some kind of, amputation with, some work to make sure that he doesn't die of bleeding. And, all they've got is this goddamn, latexy shit that they've, burnt down, and, they smoke it to hang out and whatnot. But, yeah, they throw some of that, in his face, and he kind of cools down, and they do that every hour or so, and they cut his goddamn leg off while they're getting him high, I guess. I guess, and you know, it makes sense from a perspective of someone who doesn't have the widespread use of like massive needles and morphine and all of these things that are already well regulated and tinctured into all of these. Yes, I get it. I get why opium might have had, you know, value to some of these older civilizations. So opium may be where we should have started, obviously, because laudanum was the next, you know, kind of jump in the evolutionary scale. And morphine seems to be right in league with both of them. So, I mean, we'll go back to morphine here real quick. And let's just go to Wikipedia and just talk about what morphine is. So, I mean, they really rail on it right away that it's a pain medication. You know, it's a pain medication, and yes. But it also feels to me like the pain medication you give somebody before you want them to be dead. I don't know if I'm wrong there. All I'll say is that in my experience with people who have died, morphine's usually the thing that they give you before you're going to die. It's interesting that it's on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines. Huh. Very interesting. Yeah, I'll say it's not a great thing to replace the endorphins or, you know, even worse, things like the morphine building systems in your body, or at least to shut them down or slow them down because you have excess morphine, because that's how they work, right? They basically are like, oh, well, we've got enough of everything. There's no reason to make more. You know, and if you do that long enough, they're just at a point where they're like, well, we're never going to make more. You know, it's, you know, it's your hometown from, you know, Bruce Springsteen, you know, these you know, morphine making, you know, factories are going out of your town and they ain't coming back. Yeah, sure, why the hell not? Alright, so, what I'd say about morphine, yeah, from my experience, is that the critically weak and what I would say so dysfunctional they're about to die are almost the exclusive people that I've seen on morphine, especially in an outpatient setting. In an inpatient setting in the ICU, maybe you're talking a different, you know, game. Maybe. I'll say that. I'll say I can't say that morphine is the exact same thing when you are inside of the ICU. But if they have decided for whatever reason to give you morphine and you are, what would I say, you know, living in your house, you know, doing this morphine on a daily basis, you I don't know. As long as, I'll say maybe you're fine, but as long as you're still eating well. As long as you're eating well, your body's still processing, you know, the morphine is somehow something that you're using as a replacement for all of your, you know, normal endorphins that would be regulating your pain because you don't create them for whatever reason. I mean, maybe that's a thing that happens in reality. I don't know. I haven't been in every single medical, you know, discussion in all of reality. It's possible that someone doesn't create endorphins properly. And, you know, they need to constantly take pain medication to replace them so that they can live their lives in a normal way. It's possible. But, you know, when we're looking here, potentially serious side effects of morphine include decreased respiratory effort and low blood pressure. Morphine is addictive and prone to abuse. Yes, it is. Okay, so, you know, and the person that I saw doing morphine was a, you know, a neighbor, and, you know, she was only like 45 or something, or 48. Seemed like she should have been much, much healthier. You know, couldn't eat well, would eat only ice cream and stuff, and, And she did it because of pain in her shoulder. Well, just take the pain in your shoulder. You know, pain in your shoulder doesn't debilitate you to the point where you can't stand up. That's pain in your back, you know. I've had that before. But anyway, if one's dose is reduced after long-term use, opioid withdrawal symptoms may occur. May occur. That's a joke. They will occur, but anyway. Common side effects of morphine include drowsiness, vomiting, and constipation. So, yeah, you know, if you're outpatient and you are on morphine, the likelihood that you're eating well is very low. So, you're basically just going to slow down everything and just die. That's my view of things. And it might take a long time if you are very young, like my neighbor in this instance who was under 50. You know, that's very young for what it's worth. But not too young enough to be taken and killed by such a, you know, effective thing. Anyway, caution is advised for use of morphine during pregnancy or breastfeeding as it may affect the health of the baby. Of course it would. All right. Primary source of morphine is isolation from poppy straw or opium poppy. In 2013, approximately 523 tons of morphine were produced. Why do we need so much morphine? Approximately 45 tons were used directly for pain, a fourfold increase over the last 20 years. Also, a good showing of the problems that are happening because of the overuse of opiates in general. Most use for this purpose was in the developed world. About 70% of morphine is used to make other opioids such as hydromorphone, oxymorphone, heroin. Is a Schedule 2 drug. Is Schedule 2, isn't Schedule 4 like the... You have things like marijuana that were Schedule 4 drugs. I don't know if they still are. It's only Schedule 1 in Canada? That's crazy. Sold under me. Trade names. It was the 155th most commonly prescribed medication in the United States with more than 4 million prescriptions. I mean, if you could wrap your head around how much this stuff destroys you if you're a normal person, and then you wrap your head around the idea that everyone who's taking it is basically a normal person who maybe had some kind of trauma for a slight amount of time, but not enough to justify them taking it forever. This is a scary idea. It's a scary idea. It's a scary idea that 4 million people have little, you know, droppers of morphine. And, okay, so I had, my mother had a good friend, and she was a friend to me for her part, you know. I mean, she's older and not really my friend. She was my mother's friend, but, you know, she was friendly to me. How's that? She, at the end of her life, was on morphine. And that morphine was, you know, a dropper that she would use orally. And this was the same stuff that, you know, the neighbor was on, you know. And it's just insane to imagine that somebody who's dying of brain cancer, where they have a tumor that's growing and, you know, they've tried to have surgery and then it's reduced and then they do it again and it's not, you know, working out and they end up dying anyway because it continues to grow, that they're on morphine in the same status as, you know, someone who just has shoulder pain. It's crazy. I mean, I can't imagine what that shoulder pain, if that shoulder pain created, you know, spasms that then created migraines and that, you know, debilitated, I guess if it spasmed towards the back, I don't know, I didn't talk to her. No, it seemed like it was an over medication for what she was dealing with, and she was never going to get better in such a manner. And even maybe that's not, sometimes that's not the goal of someone that's hurt, is to get better. I understand that sometimes they are hurt and, you know, getting better isn't the problem. But, you know, the point that I'm trying to make is that your morphine use is generally regulated to the people who are very near death. So it's almost wrong to give it to someone who's like an outpatient. Here's another person who was using morphine for a long time, a little bit longer than she should have anyway. It was my grandmother, and she had a cancer in her nose area, somewhere like here, and she had pain also from her hip because of a failed hip surgery. The cancer ended up killing her, but she was on morphine for almost a year after. And so, she couldn't have been eating much. She was always small and she hadn't been eating much before then. So you imagine it and you say, well, wait a second, would she have died if they had not given her morphine? And, because the cancer I don't think really was the problem. Yeah, she had gone over the cancer. They had cut it out. That's kind of an awful thing to deal with. And maybe she had chemo, or I don't even know. But the point is that it wasn't the cancer that seemed to kill her. It was the pain that she was having regularly, and then the stoppage of her body entirely because of the use of morphine, which may have happened over the course of at least a year and possibly over more than, several years. And that's insane. It's insane. So, let's move on, though, to heroin, because this is what people are actually doing. This is what people are doing out on the street. This is after somebody gets hooked on, oxycodone, which, is a simple opiate, that we're reading about. That's a derivative, from, the poppy plant like everything else. And we were seeing that you can make the oxycodone apparently from the thebaine, which is the less exciting portion of the opium in comparison to the morphine and what was the other portion? Whatever other alkaloid there was that was it just opium? What was the other alkaloid? Codeine. So there's morphine, codeine, and thebaine. And we don't really care that much for thebaine apparently, but it can be made into oxycodone, which, like I said, is what people generally are getting addicted to before they are having to go out on the street and buy heroin. Now, real quick, I can give you my own story about seeing some heroin users. And this was an interesting moment in time. So, I had just moved to Seattle, and after having moved to Seattle, I was just exploring the city. I was using the bus system. I was, working in the downtown area. And on one trip back through the Capitol Hill area, no less, interesting what's happened to it over the course of the years with all of the drugs. I didn't live in that area. I lived up in Madison Hill or something. I can't recall where it was, but we were living in this basement apartment thing. And there were three. I generally, would sit in the back of the bus because, I don't, nor am I afraid of anyone. That's not really my style. But so three men entered the back of the bus. They all kind of scroungy, not very functional looking. And one of them started counting out a series of dollar bills. He's counting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. He's like, okay, it's 17. And he's like, let me just double check this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so he's counting this over and over again, right? And so I'm looking at him and I'm like, I've decided, because I might want to help because I'm just a helpful person. So I just look over and I'm just like, all right, well, I'm going to count while he counts because there's something wrong with his brain. And I'm going to figure out exactly what the number is. I'm not probably going to tell him, because of the look of him. But, I'm going to help myself too, understanding what's going on anyway. And I would have helped him if it didn't seem so out of state. But anyway, counts it out again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And he's like, gives it to the other guy. Now, when he counts it out again, I think I've finally registered that it's like $15. And he thinks it's 17 or something. But the point is that he gives it to the other guy, and the other guy like counts it out, and he's like, "Man, you only gave me $13." And he's like, Nah, man, that's 17. And he's like, "Nah, man, you only gave me $13." He's like, "Man, fuck you, man. It's 17." And he's like, "Nah, man, it's only 30. Count again." He's like, "Man, it's only $14 here, man." And he's like, "Man, no, 17." And he's like, he counts it again. Man, there's only like $14. I don't know if it was 14 again or but basically this went on for a while until the bus stopped and the guy who had given him the money got out, upset because he didn't get something from him. Is the gist of it seemed like, oh, well, you didn't pay me my amount, so I can't give you like something, to front you again. It's only 13. It's only 14. So anyway, he gets out. And so now the other guy, so the for what it's worth, so that you can get a understanding, the back of the bus is like a little cul-de-sac, right? And I'm across the way from the guy who just got out, and there's two other guys who are now sitting in the very back of the bus. And by the very back, I mean the seat that is facing forward versus the seats that are facing to the side. I was facing to the side, as the gentleman was that was counting his money and got out, right? Gentleman. It's a nice way to say it. So, after he got out, the other guy gives the guy who had been given the money by the other man $10. And he's like, all right. And he's like, well, can I get, like maybe 9 and he's like, yeah, or 10. And he gives him $10. And then the other guy looks at me. He pulls out a thing of heroin, and he rips off a small amount of it. It's black tar heroin, by the way. It just looks like the worst thing in the world. And he rips off a small amount, and he looks at me and he says, "Hey, man, you got any cellophane?" And I look at him, and I'm like, No, I don't have any cellophane. I don't, no. Because I'm nice enough. I don't care. It's their business, for what it's worth. I'd prefer maybe it not happen, but for me, it's just a joke, I don't feel anything scary from any of these creatures. So he rips off, the little bit of heroin, and he hands it to the other guy. And, this is after asking me for the cellophane. And then they both get off at the KFC that's in Capitol Hill. So just in case you ever are in Capitol Hill in Seattle and you want to have a reference point, it was at the KFC, which is across the way from the park. The park with the big fountain, where they had all those shitty gardens, on the lawn there. It was very childish. What a fun world. Mad world. Anyway, so that's my story about the 3 heroin addicts that one of them couldn't count, the other one couldn't count, and who knows whatever happened to them as they went and did their drugs in the KFC. So, let's talk a little bit about heroin from, the perspective of, Wikipedia, I suppose. All right, so known as diacetyl morphine. So it is morphine, but you just need to add a diacetylene, I don't know what a diacetylene is. It's 2 acetylenes, isn't it? Diacetylene. To make it into heroin, apparently. And so if you wanted to do a little bit of research, you could easily probably figure out that working. And diamorphine, among other names. As an opioid, used as a recreational used as a recreational drug. I'm going to keep that as what I'm going to say. For its euphoric effects, medical grade diamorphine is used as pure hydrochloride salt, which is distinguished from black tar heroin. A variable admixture of morphine derivatives, predominantly 6-monoacetylmorphine, which is the result of crude acetylation during clandestine production of street heroin. Okay, so black tar heroin is made with a crude acetylation of 6-monoacetylmorphine versus diacetylmorphine. So they have over on the right, they have an image of diacetylmorphine. I don't know if they have an image of the 6-monoacetylmorphine. Maybe if we go like this. Yeah, you can see that it has a different form and different, structures. Even though we're not being able to see the whole of it. Let's just go real quick. Okay, so this is one of the 3 metabolites of heroin. It's being morphine and much less 3-monoacetylmorphine. First pass metabolite is then metabolite in morphine or excreted in urine. Heroin is rapidly metabolized. Encounters an isolated form due to the difficulty in selecting acetylating morphine. Okay, so that's a confusing statement, huh? You see the availability there. Sorry. Here. Availability 6-MAM is rarely encountered in an isolated form due to the difficulty in selectively acetylating morphine at the 6 position without also acetylating the 3 position. However, it is found in significant amounts in black tar heroin along with heroin itself. What is black tar? Black tar heroin is a free base form of heroin that is sticky like tar or hard like coal. Its dark color is a result of crude processing methods that leave behind impurities. Despite its name, black tar heroin can also be dark orange, dark brown. Generally less expensive. Black tar is impure diamorphine. Okay, so that's what we were getting to. We just wanted to be sure that that's what we were hearing when we read that first bit, which was this about it's a variable admixture. So really, this is what you want. You don't want this at all. If we're talking about at least the want to do heroin, I guess. That we're talking about, I guess, the heroin that Vincent Vega does in Pulp Fiction versus the heroin that I was talking about seeing the guy pinch off to the other guy. All right, so common side effects include respiratory depression, of course, yeah. So basically the whole body's shutting down and you're just going to have to make it work. Side effects of use by injection can include abscesses, infected heart valves, blood-borne infections, and pneumonia. But see, that's just improper use, so who gives a shit about those? After a history of long-term use, opioid withdrawal symptoms can begin within hours of the last use. That's interesting. Well, but what that means is that the average buffer time for any human body is about a few hours. That's not great, huh? When given by injection in a vein, heroin has 2 to 3 times the effect of a similar dose of morphine. When given by injection into a vein, heroin has 2 to 3 times the effect of a similar dose of morphine. Isn't that interesting? Because it doesn't seem like you're going to need more morphine. It's the exact same amount of morphine. And all you do is you do whatever it is that makes it, diacetylmorphine. And you make it 2 to 3 times more effective. All right, so in reference to that, let's go look at fentanyl real quick because it's supposed to be so much more effective, right? Look how much more simple it is, too. Let's go look at those differences real quick. Isn't that interesting? Jeez. Also spelled fentanyl is opioid used as a pain medication together with other medications for anesthesia. It's also used as a recreational drug, so that's maybe why a lot of people are dying from it, because they're using it as a false anesthesia to go to sleep, something like that. I mean, it could be just recreational too. Recreational drug, often mixed with heroin or cocaine. It's rapid onset and its effects generally last under 2 hours. Medically, it's used by injection, nasal spray, skin patch, or absorbed through the cheek as a lozenge or tablet. Okay. Common side effects include vomiting, constipation. Yeah, so the standard hallucinations, that's a little bit different. And injuries related to poor coordination. Serious side effects may include decreased breathing. Serotonin syndrome, yeah, that's very standard. You're replacing too many things and your body doesn't realize it has to make them anymore. Low blood pressure, addiction, or coma. Fentanyl works primarily by activating opioid receptors. It's around 100 times stronger than morphine. Okay. So here we are. And this is why I wanted to kind of just move over to fentanyl real quick. Because we were on morphine, and we moved over to heroin, right? So we were at 1, we went to 2 to 3 times, and now we're at 100 times. Now, this shouldn't be so beyond, schedule whatever. U.S. Schedule 2? Isn't Schedule 2 not that bad? That's insane. I thought it was Schedule 4, up to Schedule 4. I don't understand. Okay, so we go from 1 to 2 to 3 to now 100 times, and this stuff here should not be available in any capacity to anyone on a private scale. It should be incredibly difficult to get out of the hands of whoever it is that would be holding it on a governmental level, and they should be accounted for in all times, because something that is 100 times stronger than morphine is to be used for so very little. It's to be used for so very little, only for maybe anesthesia, and even then there's probably a question as to whether or not it's too powerful. And so this is why these people are dying in mass from, this here. Is because you literally have people taking something that is 100 times stronger than morphine. And morphine is the drug generally given to people when they are about to die. And someone might be doing this on a recreational level. That's madness. That's complete and utter madness. And that's coming from somebody who's, maybe done a lot more LSD than he probably should have, and even at one time. It's madness to imagine that you would think to do something recreationally like fentanyl. It's a crazy idea. But I don't think it's recreational. See, I think that's the trick. Is that they're saying, oh, this is recreational. I'm doing it for recreation. No, you're doing it because you're addicted immeasurably. Immeasurably addicted. That's why you're doing it. It's not for recreation. So, I don't know, man. We can look on at fentanyl just a little bit longer. Fentanyl was first made in 1960, so it's good that it didn't get into, the public sector for at least this long. It was in 2016 that fentanyl and analogs were the most common cause of overdose deaths in the United States at more than 20,000. And probably a lot of people that didn't realize what they were doing. But maybe they did. I don't know. It's very unlikely. So anesthesia. Intravenous fentanyl is often used for anesthesia and to treat pain and induce anesthesia. It is given with a sedative hypnotic like propofol or thiopental, and a muscle relaxant to maintain anesthesia. Inhaled anesthetics and additional fentanyl may be used. These are often given in 15 to 30-minute intervals throughout procedures such as endoscopy, surgeries, and in emergency rooms. Really? I didn't realize they were giving it so consistently. All right, for pain relief after surgery, use can decrease the amount of inhalation anesthetic needed for emergence from anesthesia. Oh, it's good, but it shows how bad anesthesia can be if, it's difficult to just even emerge from it. Balancing this medication and titrating the drug based on expected stimuli and the person's responses can result in a stable blood pressure and heart rate throughout a procedure and a faster emergence from anesthesia with minimal pain. All right, see, again, I said there might be a use for it in very few ways, but that's probably it. And as part of spinal anesthesia, yeah, okay. But as pain relief, the bioavailability of intranasal fentanyl is about 70 to 90%, but with some imprecision due to clouded nostrils, pharyngeal swallowing, and incorrect administration. For both emergency and palliative use, intranasal fentanyl is available in doses of 50, 100, and 200 micrograms. I believe that's what that is. In emergency medicine, safe administration of intranasal fentanyl with a low rate of side effects and a promising pain-reducing effect was demonstrated in a prospective observational study in about 900 out of hospital patients. Okay. In children, intranasal fentanyl is useful for the treatment of moderate and severe pain and is well tolerated. Isn't that strange that they're giving kids heroin, like really, really high quality versions of heroin? Yeah, I don't know very much to say that I would believe that there's any use for this. I will say this about it. Like, imagine a world where, packaging and the smallness of something does matter a grand deal. To be able to say, okay, well, I've got this intranasal spray thing, and I can give you a liter of it, and you're going to have enough painkiller for 100,000 people. Okay, now we're starting to talk about something that might be a useful reasoning for it. You can see that it comes in only microgram doses. So, versus milligrams per milliliter, which is where we used to be. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, I don't know. So, this has been kind of a real soft dive into, looking at all of these different drugs and opiates, in general, and kind of talking about what it is that they are. I don't want to, go too much further. If you want to go and find research about the death numbers of people on fentanyl, people on heroin, you can find that they are ridiculously high. But I just wanted to do a real quick, just dive and just say, okay, well, what exactly is going on with all of these things? And what are some of these numbers? And it's good to see them and, maybe get out a couple of stories about, what I've seen. Can't say I've seen anyone ever on fentanyl. They say George Floyd was on fentanyl. If that's what somebody on fentanyl's like, basically they are freaking out and having issues, and then they are having so many issues with breathing that they end up dying from like a respiratory failure that happens. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's fentanyl. Maybe Michael Jackson, someone I don't know, but I could say that's someone that was apparently a fentanyl death. But you can say the same, I believe, about Tom Petty. Yeah, it's unclear though. We don't know whether or not these people had access to fentanyl, how they were using it. It's much less clear, at least, than you might want to give it credit for. But I can say, at least from my own small perspective, what I saw with those heroin addicts, and they looked out of their minds. And, can say what I've seen with morphine. You got to be very, very careful with morphine. Once someone in your family that you love's on morphine, they're probably not going to be staying around forever. So, You either get them off of that morphine or you know, accept the fact that they're very, very near the time when they're going to not be alive anymore. But, I'll call this. It's been a good Pilfered Pyramid podcast here. Hope you enjoyed it. It was just a little soft, look at opiates in general. Probably maybe too soft a look. But anyway, hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.